Well, my dears, it's good to see you again. Well, actually, I can't see you, but I feel like I can, and that's what makes me so happy to deliver this education to you. If you're joining us for the first time, you should know that I'm Menopause Taylor, and this is Menopause University. And the only way to really get the menopause education you deserve is to start at video 1 and watch them all in order. This is video 250, and it's part of a great big unit on Alzheimer's disease that started with video 236. Last week, we addressed the effects of estrogen and progesterone on your brain throughout all the different phases of your life: childhood, puberty, menstrual cycles, pregnancy, perimenopause, and postmenopause. And I encouraged you to reflect on your own personal experience at each of these phases, because all that really matters with anything pertaining to menopause is your own personal situation. Today, I'll present the science behind your brain function and these hormones, because although we're all different with regard to our experiences, the science behind how hormones interact with your brain is fact. So this video will help you understand why you may notice a difference in the way your brain functions before you lose your hormones at postmenopause and after you lose your hormones at postmenopause. If you're following along in my book, this material is in chapter 33 in both editions, the first and the second. But as usual, in this video, I will go into more detail because I can. Our topic of interest today is how estrogen and progesterone act on your brain. Now, when I say that, does it sound strange to you? Do you associate estrogen and progesterone with only your reproductive cycle? Well, if you do, listen carefully, because you are going to discover that estrogen and progesterone are as mentally active as they are sexually active. They do as much above your waist as they do below your waist. The very basis of today's discussion is receptor sites. If that term is new to you, it means that you have not watched my videos in order, because I've discussed receptor sites a few times. Nevertheless, I'll give you a review. What you'll discover in this and any education is that the very same principles come up again and again. That is the key to education. It builds a foundation for everything. And even though the foundation is the same each time I address receptor sites, the application and details may differ a bit. So let's review. The cells of your body are somewhat like puzzle pieces. They have specific designated spots where hormones can attach to them. And we call these spots receptor sites. You see, one of the most basic principles of how hormones function is that they are produced in one part of your body and they travel to other parts of your body. And the only way any hormone can have any effect at all is if it attaches to the cell it needs to manipulate. So insulin is produced by your pancreas, but it travels to other parts of your digestive tract in order to assist with metabolism of your food. Thyroid hormone is produced in your thyroid gland, but it travels to many other parts of your body to regulate all sorts of things. So a hormone is only useful if it can attach to the cells it needs to influence. Now, you probably aren't a bit surprised that estrogen and progesterone travel to your female organs. That's where they make you ovulate, build up a cushion inside your uterus for a developing fetus, prepare your breasts for breastfeeding, etc. And it might even seem logical to you that they affect your sex drive. But what if I told you that estrogen and progesterone act on your brain for things that have absolutely nothing to do at all with reproduction? Well, they do. So going back to our puzzle pieces, anytime there is a receptor site for estrogen, the spot is reserved for estrogen and estrogen only. The analogy I've used in the past is a parking lot. When you drive into a parking lot, you look for a place to park. And most of the spots are generic, and anyone can park there. But sometimes you get ready to pull into a spot only to discover that it's reserved for only certain customers. And if you are not that kind of customer, you can't park there. Well, if instead of a parking lot with a parking spot for CVS customers only, this was a part of your body with a receptor site for estrogen only, the only type of hormone that could attach to that spot or park in that spot would be estrogen. So, way back in videos 25 through 27, I introduced you to receptor sites for the very first time. In those videos, the receptor sites had to do with the differences in pharmaceutical estrogens and phytoestrogens in terms of their competition for the parking spot. Since they're both estrogens, they're both eligible to park there, but they differ in their effects once they park because of their differing strengths. And the next time I discussed receptor sites, it was in videos 34 and 35 on the SERMs. SERMs are products that can imitate estrogen and park in an estrogen-only parking spot. The big lesson from those videos was that you have estrogen receptors in many parts of your body. And it just so happens that your brain is one of them. And it turns out that you have both estrogen receptors and progesterone receptors in your brain. Now, your body is truly magnificent. It doesn't just put hormone receptors anywhere. Wherever there are hormone receptors, there's a purpose for the hormone that belongs there. The hormone doesn't just occupy a receptor site and sit there and take a nap. It's just the opposite. When a hormone occupies a receptor site, it sets things in motion. It's the engine for a process. The attachment of the hormone to the receptor site is like an on switch. So it causes things to happen. So if the receptor site remains empty, nothing happens. Any process that is dependent on that particular hormone fails to occur. But when the hormone attaches, everything that is dependent on that hormone percolates. So let's talk about some of the effects of estrogen and progesterone on your brain. For purposes of simplicity, let's separate estrogen and progesterone completely. They have different effects on your brain, and I would not want you to assume that they both affect your brain in the same way. You know, that's one of those mistakes that gets a lot of women in trouble. They assume that progesterone, which is the baby bear's hormone, can do the same things as estrogen, which is mama bear's hormone. That's just plain goofy. Progesterone cannot do what estrogen can do any more than mama bear can wear baby bear's clothes. So always separate the two. We'll start with estrogen because it is by far the more important of the two for you, mama bear. And we might have to work our way backward a bit simply because you lose your estrogen after you have already lost your progesterone. But that's okay. We have our hormone graphs to help us. Here's the graph of what happens to your hormones as you go from premenopause to perimenopause to postmenopause. You've seen this many times. I made it with Play-Doh. The pink line of Play-Doh represents estrogen. The multicolored line represents progesterone. And the blue line represents testosterone. For now, I want you to focus on just the last part of this graph, right here. This part that's still showing is post-menopause. Okay? That's all we're going to talk about for now, post-menopause. As you can see, this is where your estrogen disappears. And what happens to your brain when your estrogen disappears? Mental fog, brain fog, fuzzy brain, brain drain, forgetfulness. This is when you start having those tip of the tongue episodes. You know, it's when you know a word for a name or a name, but you can't for the life of you remember it at the moment you need it. You forget people's names. You forget the names of objects. You forget what you were about to say just a second ago. 1 minute a thought was there and the next it's gone. You say, I forgot what I was going to say a lot. And it's not only with words. You walk into a room for something but can't remember what you needed when you get there. You put your keys in your purse and then you can't find them because you forgot putting them there. You put olive oil on your salad and then you douse it a second time because you forgot you already did it. You feel scattered and disorganized. Your ability to focus disappears, making it harder and harder to accomplish tasks that require any semblance of organization or planning. You learn to write everything down the minute you think of it, or else it's gone forever. And even when you do write things down, you have a tendency to be unable to find your written reminders when you need them. Sometimes you forget to do something because you plan it in your mind, but forget to actually put those plans into action. You make all sorts of mistakes that make your life anything but smooth. Does any of this sound familiar to you? As I describe these things, are you laughing because you wonder if I have a secret camera hiding somewhere to spy on you? I don't. I know what's happening because I know the science behind the effect of estrogen loss on your brain. So why does this happen? Well, it goes back to those estrogen receptors. Back in the day, when you still had your estrogen, they were always filled to some degree with estrogen. Last week, we dissected a single menstrual cycle. It looks like this. And even though your estrogen level fluctuates throughout your cycle, it never goes to zero. But when you become post-menopausal, it does. And zero estrogen has a hugely detrimental effect on your ability to think the way you used to. This is one of the most common symptoms of postmenopause. The fact is that when they are not filled with estrogen, your brain suffers. It constitutes estrogen deficiency for your brain. So I ask you, if this is what happens to your brain in the short term without estrogen, what do you think happens to it in the long term without estrogen? I think of any essential substance as fuel. You need food as fuel for energy. You need the vitamins and minerals in your food as fuel for various chemical reactions in your body. You need hormones as fuel for all the processes that are dependent on that particular hormone. And any time you have a deficiency in the essential substance that is the fuel for a process, you will manifest a symptom that warns you of the deficiency. That makes sense, doesn't it? And the longer you go without an essential substance, the more devastating the effects of the deficiency become. A good analogy is starvation. If you're starving, you start losing weight. The longer you starve, the more weight you lose. But that's not the only effect of starvation. Your body begins to deteriorate in a number of ways. Your muscle function suffers, your ability to fight off infection diminishes, and your brain function decreases. Well, the effect of estrogen deficiency on your brain is no different. Early on, you notice these individual, almost laughable occurrences that I've enumerated. They are supposed to be a warning sign that your brain is suffering because it is not getting something it needs. And that something is estrogen. If it continues to be deprived of estrogen, your brain will start shrinking. And that's precisely what Alzheimer's is, brain shrinkage. You saw in the osteoporosis unit that the very same thing happens to your bones. Estrogen loss equals bone loss. Well, guess what? Estrogen loss equals brain loss too. So there's more to the fact that women have higher rates of Alzheimer's than men. It has to do with the fact that women lose all their estrogen, but men do not lose all their testosterone. So it turns out that estrogen is an essential fuel for your brain. And without estrogen, your brain's overall fuel supply is reduced by 20 to 25%. That's why estrogen and Alzheimer's are so critically linked. So we actually have something called your lifetime estrogen exposure. Your lifetime estrogen exposure is the cumulative time during which your body has been exposed to estrogen. And the reason we have such a calculation at all is because there are so many things that are directly related to how long your body has been exposed to estrogen. But do not make the mistake of assuming that your lifetime estrogen exposure is something you want to minimize. It's not like radiation. Remember, we're talking about a hormone that your own body produced. Your body doesn't produce toxins for purposes of functioning normally. Estrogen is your friend, not your enemy. And don't make the mistake of assuming that your lifetime estrogen exposure is pertinent to just a particular part of your body. It has many different implications in many different parts of your body, one of which is your brain. So your lifetime estrogen exposure has a huge impact on your risk for Alzheimer's. The longer your body produces estrogen, the lower your risk for Alzheimer's. The higher your estrogen levels, the lower your risk for Alzheimer's. The more pregnancies you have, the lower your risk for Alzheimer's. That's because your estrogen levels are sky high during pregnancy. And the longer you take any kind of estrogen therapy, the lower your risk for Alzheimer's. And it turns out that the effect of estrogen on your brain is not limited to just your ability to think. Estrogen also affects your mood. Mood swings, irritability, and depression are 3 of the very common symptoms of postmenopause also. And they are related to the fact that estrogen loss affects other chemicals in your brain that control your mood. So the emotional functions of your brain are affected by estrogen deficiency too. Depression increases your risk for Alzheimer's, and that's no coincidence. And what about sleep? You learned in video 245 that insomnia and disordered breathing during sleep increase your risk for Alzheimer's. Well, those estrogen receptors in your brain depend on estrogen for a good night's sleep. And without estrogen, you can't sleep. Insomnia is a huge complaint among postmenopausal women. Do you see how all these things are connected? It's a chain of events. Here you see a chain. Each subsequent link is a manifestation of estrogen deficiency, including mood swings, irritability, and depression, followed by insomnia, followed by menopause, followed by Alzheimer's. So the effects of estrogen on your brain are huge. All you have to do to prove this is your own self-experiment in which you take estrogen for 2 months to see if it makes a difference in any of these things. Now let's turn our attention to progesterone. As you know from very early videos, the very word progesterone means hormone in support of pregnancy. Pro means in support of, gest means gestation or pregnancy, own means hormone. The reason your body produces progesterone is so that you can support a pregnancy. So progesterone really belongs to the baby. Now, does that mean it has no benefit for you at all? Not necessarily. Your brain has progesterone receptors just like it has estrogen receptors. But there are many differences between the two. And there's a huge difference between a hormone that can have some benefit for you and one that is essential for you. Estrogen is essential to the cellular function of many different kinds of cells in many parts of your body. Progesterone is not. Once you become postmenopausal, the only essential aspect of progesterone is that it prevents the inner lining of your uterus from getting too thick and turning into uterine cancer. So once you become postmenopausal, you only have to take progesterone if you have your uterus. Or more specifically, I should say if you have your uterine lining. If you've had a procedure called a uterine ablation, your uterine lining has been destroyed. And if it's been destroyed, it cannot turn into uterine cancer. So you only need progesterone at postmenopause if your uterine lining is still functional. But let's talk about the effect of progesterone on your brain. And the easiest way to do that is to talk about what progesterone does to your brain when you're pregnant, because that's when you have loads of it and its effects are very obvious. When you get pregnant, your progesterone level increases by about 10 times. So it's a time when you can easily determine progesterone's various effects on different parts of your body. One of the first symptoms of early pregnancy is drowsiness. Most women describe it as a sluggish, tired, draggy feeling. They feel like they could sleep standing up. This makes sense in terms of what's best for the baby. If mom is drowsy and sluggish, she'll rest a lot so that the baby can use more calories to grow. But this sluggishness affects both your brain and your body. Not only do you want to sit around like a couch potato, you also tend to be a little sluggish in your thinking. And the mental sluggishness is very much like the menofog of menopause. So there's some kind of opposing effect between estrogen and progesterone on your brain. Estrogen makes it sharper and snappier, while progesterone makes it duller and slower. Another very common symptom of pregnancy is a state of calm and contentment. And again, that's what's best for the baby. A mom who is relaxed is going to provide a better environment for a growing fetus. So progesterone is an anti-anxiety hormone. And while you do think more clearly when you're not anxious, the effect is secondary. What about the effect of progesterone on your brain at the time of perimenopause? Here we have our graph again. And now we have this part. This is the time when you can assess the effect of the absence of progesterone on your brain, because you see that the progesterone has dropped here, while the estrogen has not. If you go back to this, you see that your progesterone starts declining about 2 to 10 years before you lose all your estrogen. So you have a period of time when you have estrogen but no progesterone. This is called perimenopause. Now, while the graph shows estrogen levels as normal and progesterone levels decreasing, that's not quite what happens in real life. Throughout your reproductive life, estrogen and progesterone act as partners. It's as if they're dancing. Here's the graph of how they interact when you're having menstrual cycles. So when they're both there, everything is fine. But when progesterone disappears at perimenopause, it leaves your estrogen kind of confused. Without her partner, your estrogen goes a bit wacko. Last week I showed you this to depict that. Here you see estrogen in orange and progesterone in blue. Look at the last part of the graph where the blue progesterone has started disappearing, but the estrogen just keeps going up and down, up and down. It is a very chaotic time that makes it difficult for you to separate which of your symptoms are due solely to the loss of progesterone versus wacko estrogen. But most women find that their menopause starts when their estrogen disappears, not when their progesterone disappears. And those who notice menopause during perimenopause notice a worsening of it at postmenopause. So the question becomes, is progesterone beneficial for the functioning of your brain, or is it just estrogen? Now, you know me. You know that I'm going to tell you that no two women are alike, and all that matters is what happens for you. But it's really easy to do an experiment on yourself to figure this out. Way back in video 41, I taught you about the two different regimens for taking HRT. There's the cyclic regimen and there's the continuous regimen. If you try both of these regimens for just 2 months each, you will immediately know whether your brain needs just estrogen or whether progesterone offers some benefit. With the cyclic regimen, You take estrogen all by itself for about 1/2 to 2/3 of the month. And then you add progesterone for 5 to 14 days of the month. If your brain functions beautifully on the days when you take only the estrogen, but it feels muddled on the days when you add the progesterone, then there's your answer. That's the case for the vast majority of women. On the other hand, if your thinking is much clearer on the days you take progesterone, then for you, progesterone offers your brain a benefit. If you then try the continuous regimen in which you take both estrogen and progesterone every single day, you'll see that your brain function is more consistent. But the big question will be, is it better than it is with estrogen alone, or is it worse? The vast majority of women find that their brain functions at its very best with estrogen alone. The addition of progesterone makes their brains a little less crisp, or a lot less crisp. But hey, all that matters is what works for you. But unlike estrogen, progesterone does not have any specific benefit in preventing the brain shrinkage that characterizes Alzheimer's. So the lesson of this video is that your brain has estrogen receptors and progesterone receptors. The estrogen receptors function to make your moods even, your sleep sound, your thinking crisp and clear, and your brain dense. In essence, it helps prevent Alzheimer's. The progesterone receptors function to make you feel drowsy and sluggish, as well as less anxious, but it dulls your thinking a bit. And in essence, it does nothing to prevent Alzheimer's. So the science underlying estrogen in your brain is that your brain needs estrogen. That's why you have menopause when you lose your estrogen at the time of menopause. And without estrogen, your brain starts shrinking. And the longer your brain is deprived of estrogen, the more it shrinks, just like your bones do. Themes like this always make so much sense. You'll notice throughout this education that there are some instances when a particular situation or option has an advantage over others. In such cases, be sure to realize that I will always be very specific about that advantage. Do not extrapolate. In other words, don't generalize. Just because a certain situation or option is better for some circumstances does not mean it's better for all circumstances. Everything has both advantages and disadvantages. Women get themselves into all sorts of trouble when they hear something and apply it to everything and everybody rather than to just the situation to which it applies. That's why I tell you it's critical to watch these videos in order. I am very specific about giving you facts for each topic individually. Your job is to tailor them to you. So when it comes to your brain, you're better off if you don't have to take progesterone. But if you still have your uterus with a functional inner lining, you have to take progesterone. Progesterone prevents uterine cancer, but progesterone does not directly harm your brain. It just negates some of the beneficial effects of estrogen in preventing menopause in the short term and Alzheimer's in the long term. So the bottom line with menopause in your brain is that when you lose your hormones at menopause, your brain does not function the way it did before. Okay, that's it for today. Next week, you're going to learn about another theme that makes total sense. I'll be discussing the effect of different types of menopause on your risk for Alzheimer's. You know that you can have a consultation with me anytime. It's a shortcut to getting the entire education tailored specifically to you. In a consultation, I give you all the essential information whether you want it or not. That's my job. I'm like your mother, and it's what you deserve. So if you ever want a consultation, just go to menopausetailor.me to schedule one. I will see you in a week. In the meantime, I'll see you on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and I hope you subscribe. Bye.